On behalf of the American University of Armenia, I want to welcome everybody today. My name is Shara Seymour-Koyen. I'm the Dean of General Education. We had a very unique opportunity to partner with the Genocide Education Project today, and we're incredibly excited about this opportunity for lots of reasons, which we'll continue to talk about a little bit throughout this afternoon. I particularly want to welcome the 2022 Genocide Education Project Fellows. I think it's everybody's first time in Armenia, certainly your first time at the American University. We are excited to host you here because you're doing such incredible work in your communities, in schools, in terms of helping us educate generations of young people to really think about what the slogan "Never Again" really means. So we appreciate the work that you're doing. The reason that we're so excited about hosting this today is because we know you have an opportunity to really dive deep into pedagogy and content around genocide, the Armenian genocide, human rights violations, and the workshop that the Education Project is hosting over the course of the weeks. And we wanted an opportunity to introduce you to where we are today in terms of a country, a little bit in terms of a nation. This 31 years since independence has multiple meaning for us here at the university, because not only was the country, did the country declare independence 31 years ago, but the American University of Armenia declared its independence on the same day that the country did, opened its doors on the same day that the country did. So we're also celebrating 31 years today. And this is an opportunity for us to look at where we started 31 years ago, some of the progress that we've made, and we certainly have made a lot of progress as a country, to look at a few of the milestones that we've reached, and to also look at some of the challenges that we face, both in terms of a small nation, in terms of finding ourselves in a neighborhood that tends to have some neighbors that are not always friendly, particularly to us. But to look at the challenges that poses for us, and what we can do in terms of facing some of those challenges. We have a remarkable panel today. I'm going to ask them to come up slowly, and then I'm going to introduce our facilitator, who will introduce the rest of us. So Vache Gabrielian is the Dean of the Aoes College of Business and Economics. He is also the former Deputy Chair of the Central Bank of Armenia, as well as the former finance minister of the country. His breadth of knowledge and experiences around the sector that he's going to talk about, which is the economy, is incredible. So Vache, if you'll join us on stage. Vahram Mateosyan is the program chair for our Department of Political Science and International Affairs. It's a graduate program. He's done extensive research in Armenia's political situation and its development of its government sector, and he's going to be talking to us about the political system and where we've come. So, Vahdam, if you'll join us. Hasmi Gurevian, where's Hasmi? I see her somewhere. Thank you. Hasmi is the co-founder of Paradigma Foundation, which is an education foundation that is looking at the education sector in the country. Hasmi is also a graduate of the American University of Armenia. She's just finishing her doctorate at University College London, and she has also not only done extensive research in what's happening in the education sector, but she has been able to share policy recommendations in a number of different areas. So I want to thank you very much for joining us. I also want to thank our facilitator. Give me 1 second before I do that, because what I forgot to do was thank the incredible staff and board at the Genocide Education Foundation that we've worked with. So Roxanne, Sarah, Christina, you're an intern. I know, we're so happy that you're here. I don't know where you just walked over to. Seta, and Hasmik, I know you've also been involved. And the fact that you reached out to us to engage with this is really something that we're excited about. We hope to continue to be able to work together to help teachers in different areas really get a sense of where we are today in terms of Armenia. So our facilitator today, who I think you've met, at least the fellows have met, and some of the students in this class obviously have already met. Dr. Sudan Manukyan is an adjunct faculty member here at the university. He teaches courses on the Armenian genocide, on genocide in general. He's recently developed a course on the Jewish Holocaust. He is also the UNESCO chair in genocide studies at Yerevan State University and has been a board member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. We're incredibly thankful to you, Sudan, for facilitating this conversation, and to all of you, we look forward to a really thoughtful and meaningful discussion today.
Thank you, Dr. Konyan, for introducing me, and I want to welcome all you who find time and join us in this discussion. It's my privilege to facilitate the conversation with such attractive presenters, and yes, I'm sure you chose to spend these 1.5 hours with us, and you made the right decision. And yes, and thank you all for being with us. And I want to welcome educators who came to Armenia from the United States, and I hope they enjoy Armenia and get in-depth knowledge of the Armenian genocide, but also of our country. And among them, by the way, Dr. Mary Johnson, a person who co-authors the fabulous book, Facing the History of Ourselves, published on the Armenian genocide. And we used this book extensively in my classes, in my students who are here. They know the book very well. But before we start, let me say some 2 words. I remember my childhood, the very day when we celebrated the proclamation of Armenian independence with my family. It was in Gyumri, the city destroyed after the earthquake of 1988 during the war in Artsakh, but it was a time of optimism. We started our statehood with great hopes of democracy. We developed economy and educated society. This optimism soon met reality, of course. 2 wars, the blockade of Armenia by Azerbaijan and Turkey, a weak economy, the impoverishment of much of the population, and the immigration, hundreds of thousands of Armenian citizens. But at the same time, in some aspects, we have, in our life, we have progress. And today, here with me are 3 true experts in their fields, and it's an excellent opportunity to talk today about where we are, about the legacy of these 31 years of Armenian independence and conditions, progress, and challenges faced in economy, political sphere, and educational sector. Why we chosen these 3 spheres, these 3 fields? Because we think economic growth is linked causally to a more skilled, literate population, and therefore to political liberalization. And prosperity would lead to education, which in turn would lead to cultural change and provide a social base for more democracy. So these 3 spheres, these 3 fields are interconnected. And it's my pleasure to give floor to Dr. Vache Gabriela and ask him to outline a bit where we are from the economic perspective.
Thank you for the question. It is a very short question with very large answer. Just to paint a picture with a broad brushwork. In 1991, we were still a Soviet economy. What does it mean? It means that we were, by a very interesting coincidence, this university is unique, because it is the only ever American university that got its license during Soviet era. In September 21st, 1991, we got our license, and the same day there was a referendum of independence of Armenia. And by December of 1991, Soviet Union was gone. In Belaruskaya Pushta in Belarus, they decided that there is not going to be any more Soviet Union, and we became independent. If we are going to think about Soviet economy, what it was like, Soviet economy was centralized, and there were no economic agents free who were making decisions on their own. There was big ministry, which is called State Planning Ministry or Committee, that decided what everybody had to produce, what everybody had to sell, where to sell, whom to sell, how much money they would make, and actually started to do a command economy. And it was a very interesting economy because when we are trying also to figure out how much we grown up or how we didn't grow up, we have to understand that Soviet Union, of course, calculated everything, what they produced, etc., etc. But there were certain things that we didn't think they are worthy to be considered in national income. There is this very interesting scholar, Janusz Kornai, who was the only Soviet bloc intellectual who was traveling in between the United States and Hungary, and he called the Soviet system net material product because, for example, if artists were singing and he or she was selling millions of tickets in concerts, you were buying it, they were not considering it to be a part of national income because it was not material product. It was something that was created by not the working class, who was the real value creator, but somebody else. Artists were tolerated, but they were not as good as the working class. So when they were trying to figure out how much economy was there and how much economy is, and now we have to think about everything with a grain of salt, and in this understanding that our calculations are approximations. We are not exactly calculating because the things that they were measuring then and things they are measuring now are not completely comparable. So by 1990 we had our economy, if to believe to the World Bank calculations, somewhere around 6 billion USD in 2015, constant US dollars. Currently we have about double size of it, 12.5 or so, 14 billion US dollars worth of economy. Is this a lot or is this not good? Now, if you are comparing it to oil-rich countries, they make tremendous wealth, particularly if you are talking about Russia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, etc. If you are talking about countries like Ukraine, it's much better because Ukraine is one of the few countries that didn't resume to the post-Soviet, pre-Soviet or Soviet era growth levels or economy level. Country had a lot of problems, corruption, etc., etc. And if you are considering Armenia, we doubled. Ukraine didn't come to the level of 1991 yet, even before the war. It was not only because of bad management, it was largely because disintegration of Soviet Union. Because the economy was cooperating together, and Soviet Union State Planning Committee would decide that you are producing something here, you are producing something there, and you would not trade with your neighbor immediately, which is 50 miles away, but you will trade with somebody else who is 15,000 miles away. Because Soviet Union was big and state planners decided that this is the logic of it. So with all these developments, we have more or less double the size. If you are looking at what much is government controlled in Armenia. In Armenia, in our financial system, we don't have government-controlled entities. There is no government-owned bank, there are no government-owned insurance agencies, etc. There are organizations like Export Promotion Agency or something like that, but they are minuscule. So our economy is mostly private. During Soviet era, our economy was predominantly actually state-owned. Even the collective farms that were owned by the people who worked on the collective farm were de facto run as government entities. So private sector-wise, we have made a tremendous leap. And now we have just a couple of strategic companies that are under government control, and they are very few. It's like the high voltage electricity grid work, it is the nuclear power station, and a couple of such entities that are vital to ensure the normal functioning of the economy. So from this perspective, we made a tremendous leap from completely Soviet type controlled command economy to a new type of economy, which is market economy. And in this market economy, there are a lot of inefficiencies. There are some monopolies, there are market rigidities, this and that, all the things given, but it is not a Soviet type of economy, it's a market economy with minimal state involvement. And if you compare to many other countries within the Soviet region, former Soviet Union, we are a very private market-driven economy to a certain extent. It also talks about why in certain areas economy is quite resilient, because it is driven by market forces that have more adaptability to the conditions and more resilience. We didn't have our national currency, we didn't have our national banking system, so we started it in 1993. Basically, when the empires are collapsing, you are having gradual movement. In ruble was the currency 2 years after Soviet Union has collapsed. Russia introduced its own ruble, but still there are things that you have to be aware that economic realities continue, people continue to trade, and there is a need for them to trade, exchange goods, etc. Then there was shortage because the economy wasn't performing as well as we decided that as soon as we become democratic and independent and as soon as we elect our first democratic government, we are going to be very, very productive. We are going to be very rich immediately. It didn't happen. There was a slump in the 90s. In Armenia, it was exacerbated by the war and blockade, as Suren has already told. After 1994, when we had truce that lasted for a while until 2020, the economy started to grow. It's particularly started to grow significantly in the early Aoes. Why? Because it was the general growth time, not as much in the 90s, but in the early Aoes there was global boom, globalization was coming to its peak in 2008, and with loose monetary policy in the United States and oil prices going up in the neighboring region, we have a lot of people who were working abroad, Armenian population as migrant population, bringing in remittances. The economy was recovering, demand was recovering, growth was recovering, and in about 2006 or 7, we came to the level of production that we had in 1991. Again, when I'm talking about numbers, these numbers are comparable to the extrapolations that we make, because in Soviet Union and now we are calculating economy in different forms. We have all the Western institutions that are dealing with economic growth in place. For example, we borrowed quite heavily from the United States on public sector utilities regulation. We created, for example, Energy Committee. Now it's Public Sector Services Regulatory Committee. Initially it was only energy, now it is water, it is telecommunication, etc., etc. So it's an independent institution, independent board, like in the United States. They are the rate setters, and they decide what the rate is going to be so that there should be both investment and the consumers shouldn't be charged much. So we incorporated these institutions as well. Now, we have more or less all the needed governance infrastructures in place to do it. But one thing is, as one of the US presidents phrased it, to make a constitution, one thing is to run it. If we have these institutions, do they actually run properly? And are they very efficient? I wouldn't claim that they are wonderful institutions that are functioning without any peril. And, but if you are taking on a global view, do we have basic institutional support for a market economy to function? More or less, we have the infrastructures, governance infrastructures in place. We have quite independent central bank. We have regulatory committees or commissions who are deciding with the issue. We have statistics that is produced not in tune with current cabinet in place, and thus we have more or less framework for the market economy to operate. As a result, if we are taking different numbers until about 2008-9, the boom years, we were by growth rates in the top 10 of the world countries for the 15 years. Then there was a slump, and we had a big slump during the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. And it was due to unregulated growth in our construction industry. We had a lot of remittances coming in, a lot of people were pouring money, and everybody was into real estate. Real estate and construction became a very large chunk of our economy. In 2008, it topped 25% of the economy, which is too big for any economy to, well, it's about at least twice, 2.5 times bigger than usually it is in most of the countries. So in 2009, we had 15% decline in the output. Most of it was construction. All the other parts were very low in the drop of demand and economic activity. In construction, what is particularly large, about 10% decrease. We started to recover, and we got, in 3-4 years, the levels of that. Then we had another crisis, which was in 2015. And in 2015, the crisis was a particular regional crisis. In the regional crisis, there was both start of the sanctions against Russia due to Crimea, but also, most importantly, for Russian economy, it was the decline in the price of the fossil fuels, which brought a big problem in the Russian economy, and the biggest impact that the Russian economy is having across its neighboring countries through remittances and trade. We saw remittances halving, and we saw that trade actually started to increase because suddenly Russian goods started to become much cheaper because the dollar devalued for about twice. Then we recovered this slump. We didn't have growth loss, but in 2015 our growth was minuscule. It was 0.5% or something. Then we were moving on to bigger, better things. 2017 and 2019 we had 7.5% growth. Then two calamities struck together. It was COVID and it was the war with Azerbaijan. As a result of it, 2020 was a very bad year in all possible aspects that you can imagine in Armenia. And we had economic decline for about 7%. After that, our problem is, as almost everywhere else in the world, inflation together with recovery, how to recover from the 2002 decline without adding too much to the cost that is brought by inflation, which is mostly coming from abroad. Briefly, this is the situation. I tried to take a very broad perspective and to go over it in very large brushstrokes, but if there are any questions, I'll be more than ready to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriela, for this very illuminating talk. And our next presenter is Dr. Voluntary Attestation, and I would ask him to again to present this big canvas of the political development of Armenia after years of independence, successes, failures, and now the reality.
Right, thank you very much. I want to warmly welcome our colleagues from the United States. I'm asked to squeeze 31 years into 12 minutes, so wish me good luck. So what I want to do, I want to start with a personal anecdote. In 2017, when I asked my students to fill out course evaluations of my Caucasus Politics course. This is a course that I've been teaching since 2011, since the moment I joined Aoes. The course touched upon the political history of Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Georgia. And during this course evaluations, one of the students wrote down the following, more or less, that it's good that we are discussing these countries' domestic politics. How about Armenian politics? It just occurred to me that, damn right, we're not offering Armenian politics. And I designed a new syllabus, and we reviewed with our colleagues, and I started to offer the Armenian politics course. And then I started to expand the search area, and then it also occurred to me that other universities in this country are also not offering Armenian politics the way we offer to our students. And moreover, my research also showed that in this country, Russian politics is also not offered as a course in institutional higher education. So as this went on, I understood that there is a great need for a revised approach of how we teach Armenian political history of the last 30 years. So when this required course for the master's degree students, when they enter the program, this is one of the courses that they take. And as my students know, I like to experiment. So one of the things that I asked them to do during the first few weeks, I give them two texts. It's about news reports, and I'm asking them to more or less determine the year of this news. And some of them are having a hard time to determine the year. And this is an experiment. One is from 1985, when one of Soviet Armenian newspapers was discussing corruption in Soviet Armenia. And the other one is from 1995, again discussing corruption. And you see very little difference between these two texts. So with that, I am also implying in the classes that we think of 1981 as a rupture, that it's a clean slate, everything was going to be different from 1981, but sometimes we forget the continuity, the legacy of Soviet Armenia that independent Armenia has inherited. Once we start to discuss the continuities from Soviet Armenia to post-Soviet Armenia, we also start to discuss the questions of where does these continuities emerge and derive. And then by discussions with students arrive to the conclusion that the most interesting probable event that we can start discussing from is the Destabilization Period in the 1950s. This is where the Soviet system started to open up slowly, yet heavily controlled by the state. But this is where we see how the ideas that were banned before the 1953 were starting to emerged in the public domain. Intellectuals started to discuss things that were unimaginable some years ago. And then we come to the year 1965 as genocide, as you teach genocide history. You know that 1965 is a turning history of Armenian, in the 20th century Armenian history. But again, with our students, we try to question the 1965. How much was it a turning point? What factors contributed to 1965? Why people went to the streets in Armenia in 1965 in this tightly controlled society and tried to demand lands from the Republic of Turkey, tried to demand historical justice. These were just unimaginable. But if we go to the bottom of this 1965 public rallies in Soviet Armenia, in Yerevan, we see that some of these sources go to the Armenian church, which was becoming much more assertive in the public domain and was becoming much more outspoken about the historical injustices that befell on the Armenian nation. So when we discuss these things with our students, they understand by the third week of the Armenian politics course that independent Armenia didn't fall down out of nowhere. The bureaucracy, more or less, were the same Soviet bureaucracy. The people, the education institutions, the policies and norms and procedures were inherited from Soviet Armenia. So once we establish this notion, then it makes much easier for us to move on to discuss the developments that happening in Armenia since the 1990s. Another thing that we discussed with our students is the Declaration of Independence of Armenia. It was adopted in 1990 in August, and with our students we go into the details of this Declaration of Independence. It's a very interesting document, and we discuss with our students, we try to go and read between the lines, try to understand what was the atmosphere back then. But we also compare the 1990 Declaration of Independence with 1918 Declaration of Independence. We try to see parallels. We try to reconstruct the history and the environment, political atmosphere of the period. Another experiment that we do during the class is to discuss the impact of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict on the political developments of Armenia in the 1990s, 2000s, and even until nowadays. One of the things that is missing, and I've been quite outspoken about this, that unlike unlike politicians in the United States, Armenian politicians, foreign politicians, they don't like to write memoirs, which makes our job rather difficult. I can count around 10 books that former politicians, high-ranking officials have written about their experience, but that's about it. I mean, otherwise, each time someone decides to publish something, I am the one which encourages them to get published more and more, because it makes our job as researchers, as teachers, as professors, much easier, because we know we need primary sources. We need that our former politicians, statesmen, to speak up about their experience. What was it like to run a country like Armenia? And then we discuss another thing that we do during the class is discuss the turning points of the last 31 years of Armenia's history. 1999 comes as one of the first indications of that the turning. It was an event of major implications when there was a terrorist attack in Armenia's parliament, when 8 statesmen were killed in broad daylight. Some students think that this is a time when Armenia shifted. Armenia's national security architecture has shifted dramatically. Others claim that Others claim that it was 2008 March events in the streets of Yerevan, and when 10 people were killed during this during the street protests. Others are claiming that no, it should be 2016 when the 4-day escalation occurred in Karabakh on the Azerbaijani Artsakh front line. Others claiming no, this should be 2018 when there's a change of government in this country. Yet, I guess there's a consensus that 2020 was a really turning point in Armenia's recent history. So, what we do in Armenian politics course, and what I'm trying to do in other courses that I teach here, is try to question the established facts and interpretation of these facts. Because there's, even if you open Armenian textbooks, high school textbooks, my son just graduated from high school, from time to time I read the textbooks, and sometimes I'm just taken aback how unprofessional the history is taught. Sometimes it's not taught, sorry, I take it back, how unprofessionally the textbooks are designed. If you want to distract kids from history, you have to read their textbooks sometimes. I mean, they were, just one example. So my son comes down to me and says, Dad, I've seen this question in the final year exam. The question is, so when Armenian troops took control of one castle, what slogan did they chant? This, and that. I mean, it was just unimaginable that they can ask a kid to learn by heart the slogans or chants that Armenian troops voiced when they entered in the castle. So I think overall the way the Armenian history has been taught should be completely revised. The part that may interest you, the Armenian genocide, how is this represented in Armenian history textbooks? No context is provided, no historical, geopolitical context is provided, no social context is provided why the genocide occurred the way it occurred in the Ottoman Empire. So the final note, I think Armenia's political system went through fundamental changes, and it is still going through. The war, the devastating war, has impacted the Armenian political system. It's going to impact, even though the interpretations, current interpretations claim that the war is, it had to appear, but no. I guess the war is going to also to have implications on some of the established narratives of Armenia's recent history. Some of the established discourses that shaped our identity, the common identity, are being now questioned and revisited. And for the coming years, we're going to see that some of the it's already happening. Some of the established truths, let's say, are also going to be revisited. So I'll stop here, and I'm sure there will be questions, and we can take these questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Destabilization, for these fascinating notes you shared with us, and I think also very well provoked, and we will have many questions. And the last but not least in this panel is presentation on education. I put the presentation on education at the end of this panel because I believe that education is the key, and to start discussing the failures and the successes, the progress, and today's condition of our state, we should focus mostly on education methods. And it's my pleasure to ask Hasmik, Julian, to start our talk. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. As we have changed, I need to adjust my microphone again, sorry. Oops. Thank you very much. As it has been already mentioned, education is one of the most important sectors for any country, and as teachers, I mean, you can prove that, and myself as a former teacher as well, I can prove that. And as currently I work in the sector of education, and I do research in the field of education, and also different education-related projects, I can prove that to be right. So as my colleagues have already mentioned, Armenia got independence in 1991, and since then the education system has undergone several reforms, and I will just mention a few of them, but later if you would have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. So the reforms mainly included the introduction of general education curriculum, then changing the grading system, moving from 5 to 10 point scale system, then the extension of schooling years. So previously we had 10-year schooling system, and now we have 12-year. That is the way to say we created high-level school, high school level, which includes 10, 11, and 12th grade. So the reforms that the system has undergone actually have been connected to the new public management system and the logic of new public management system, as my colleagues have already mentioned, both in terms of economic policy and in terms of in general policies. The reforms mainly aim to match that new kind of narratives and new discourse in terms of new public management. And some of the reforms were connected also with the introduction of boards in schools, which I think, with my kind of personal perspective, does not prove to be effective in Armenian settings. And the next reform that I can mention is the move from changes in education funding. That is, we moved from lump sum funding to per capita funding, which is, again, I think now is kind of creating certain issues. But the aim of that reform was to increase the competition amongst schools. I'm sure my colleagues from the USA is familiar with that, because schools compete with each other, and you know better how it works and why it doesn't. I would like also to share, to tell you that the share of GDP spending on education is very low in Armenia. It's currently 2.8, which is very low, comparing to kind of peer average, to anything. Yes, and so it's known that if you want to have at least good quality education system, the spending should be at least 4%, but it's 28 now, which is very bad. But having said that, I want to believe that the state and the Minister of Education are really trying hard to kind of do their best to ensure good quality education. So I will continue talking about actually teaching and teacher profession, how to become teacher, and how the recruitment happens, how the retention and CPD mechanisms are implemented in Armenia. So currently, by the law on general education, it's stated that individuals who have a university degree and who have teaching qualification can teach at schools. So it's the minimum requirement. So individuals who don't have a university degree, let's say bachelor degree, or even if they have bachelor but they don't have teaching qualification. That is to say that they didn't take the pedagogy course, they don't have pedagogy credits, they can't teach at school, so they can't become teachers. In terms of recruitment, it's based on a competition. Schools announce the vacancies, and individuals who comply with the requirements to work as teachers can apply and can participate in the competition. It's usually 2 stages procedure. The first one is a written test, which is subject-based, and the second one is an interview. And the questions of interviews usually include like questions from pedagogy and from legal regulations, etc., related to teaching and teachers. In terms of retention policies, so we have just a few one in place. The first one is that teachers have social packages that includes health insurance and
fringe benefits. In US English, it's fringe benefits.
Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you. It's not that big. I mean, teachers usually complain that it allows very little kind of things for them. Like, for example, health insurance is very basic, but at least it's something, and our recent research has shown that it's satisfactory for teachers. Another thing is that the state has recently introduced voluntary attestation. That is to say, teachers can voluntarily apply to participate in a subject that they are teaching, and if they get 70 plus score, then they will have increase in their salary from 30% to 50%, depending how much they will get from the test. With this, the state is trying to address like the teacher shortage, and somehow address teacher shortage, and also to attract more candidates. But in general, teaching profession is not attractive in Armenia because of the very, very low salary. So if you can imagine, so teachers' average salary is 55% lower than the overall average salary in Armenia. Yeah. So, but overall, I would like also to talk about certain progress that I see and positive moves in the field of education. So, firstly, I think that despite of all this, we have functioning system, taking into account that it's already like 31 years that we got the independence, and we have a functioning system. So I'm not taking whether it's good or bad, or in some areas it's bad or good. It's just functioning system, which is good from my point of view. Another thing is that secondary education is free of charge, and it's compulsory for kids. There are also private schools in Armenia, which adds certain kind of variety and diversity for the parents to choose the school for their kids. In terms of reforms that I would like to mention, they are in general are not bad, but the issue with them is that there are no mechanism of proper evaluation and monitoring of the impact, and there is no continuity of the reforms. The reforms seem not to be coherent and logically linked to each other, which creates problems and again creates gaps in the system. Another positive kind of point in the field of education is the implementation of Food World Program. So the Ministry of Education and the UN Food Program together jointly are implementing that, and this is somehow solving the problem of poverty and malnutrition, especially for kids in primary school. So this program is mainly implemented in the regions, in the rural areas where poverty is of a high level. So if I can say so, so 1 in 5 household in Armenia suffers from food shortage. So just for you to imagine what I'm talking about. So, but in light of all this, Armenia is currently embarking new changes in the education sector, in the field of education, and those changes include three main directions. So the first direction is they are changing the general education curriculum. They are rewriting at some points the old one, and the major changes within that new curriculum reform is that there won't be any grading in the primary schooling level. That is to say, until the second semester of 5th grade, the kids won't have any kind of digital grades, and everything will be like written formatively. And a new formative assessment mechanism is coming to place with this new curriculum reform. And also what is important is that in terms of high schools, the kids will be able to compile their own curriculum by selecting the subjects that they want to learn. So this is a new move and something really new. Another thing is that the curriculum is a competency-based curriculum, and the project-based learning is highly emphasized within this new curriculum. So the second direction is the introduction of teacher professional standards and new mechanisms of voluntary attestation that I have already mentioned, which again aims to somehow attract teachers and keep them within the teaching profession at schools. The third direction is the introduction of a new system of government of schools, and the major change here is that the school principal will be responsible only for content, that is to say the quality of teaching and the quality of materials and the quality of teaching stuff in general, whereas before the principal was responsible for everything at school, like for content, for administration, for managemental issues, etc. Another positive point in the sector of education is that more and more private organizations, NGOs, and foundations are taking some role in doing certain projects and filling the gaps in the field of education. And though myself, as a representative of one of those foundations, I think that we're doing great job, great work in the field of education. I think that the state should should take the major role in kind of creating and regulating the field. For now, I consider it a positive point because we see the gaps in the field of education, and we try to fill the gaps. But we hope that the state and the Minister of Education will develop the capacity to be able to address all those gaps without relying on external organizations like it does now. So, and I would like also to talk about the challenges that the system faces, though I have touched upon some of them. Particularly the major challenges is funding, which is very, very low, like it's 2.88%. Another issue is that the population, the demographic issue, the population decline is a real issue for the sector, and considering the trends, it's going to decrease more. Child malnutrition, as I have already mentioned, and poverty is another great issue. Teacher availability and competence, we have lack of qualified teachers because it's not attractive, like high quality school graduates are not interested in becoming teachers, and they do not apply to pedagogic universities to be teachers in the future. So the state currently made amendment in the law on general education trying to address the shortage by stating that individuals who have university degree can take additional pedagogic courses, which is 30 credits of pedagogy courses, and can be able to teach at schools. But there is still
15 US credits
15.
for these European style, so it's 15 US credits.
So for thank you. So while there is legal regulation for that, for this different routes to become a teacher, there is no procedure that ensures. For example, if somebody for now would like to take that route of becoming a teacher, there is no procedure of doing that. So it's just written there, but it's not acting. It's not exercise for now. In terms of another challenge is that according to TIMSS research, among 15 years olds there is 40% of functional illiteracy, which is again a big issue, which is rooted actually in the preschool education problems, because there is a lack of preschool education institutions in Armenia, and overall the enrollment rate of preschool education is about 25% or something. It's very low in rural areas, which kind of hinders women to enter to workforce, yes. And also another challenge, and this is I promise this is the last one, is that not all schools have a World Food Program in that, which is a problem, especially in rural areas. But I know that the government is working towards that, towards being able to implement that program across all the schools. I think this is much as I can kind of summarize and put together for this 10 minutes, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you would have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hasmin, for this very detailed presentation of our educational system, of some reforms, of some developments. Now, we have time for questions. And if you have questions, you can just come to the microphone we have there, and here in both sides of our hall, and feel free to address your questions to our speakers. But now I want to before you are preparing your questions, I want to give word to Roxana, who is one of the founders of Genocide Education Project. Please. Yeah.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. I just wanted to, I don't have remarks except a big thank you to AUA, a thank you to professors who gave us, I felt a great overview, something that I kind of superficially gave when all of these teachers were asking all these questions this week. And to the extent that I could give a little bit of an insight, I tried to do that, but I'm very gratified that we were able to give them the expert version of that. Just as an Armenian American, my gratitude and for all of your work. You all have so many different hats that you're contributing to this country's development and contributing in such a deep way to understanding the history in an effort to improve tomorrow. And that's what our teachers are doing and trying to do with our American students. Thank you, Sherry and AUA, for just not even taking a moment to consider our request to work together in this way and to develop that further. So that's all I wanted to say, and I think I'm going to be the first question too. So I can maybe give you that question from here, if that's
Yes,
okay.
yes, please.
So two questions, one about economy and one about education, but my computer is here. On education, you kind of touched on the poverty question, and that's kind of what I was hoping to hear a little bit more about, just social, like everything you spoke to us about the economy and how it's developed. How does that translate to the daily lives of the people, and kind of what is the economic groupings, you know, and the ratios? Upper class, middle class, poverty, how does that, if you could give us a picture of that. And also, so many of our teacher fellows had this question, and I've always had it when I've come to Yerevan in particular. Just on the surface, we see what to us looks like a lot of wealth, but we are under the impression, and we are told, that there's very high poverty, and we don't quite understand what's happening. And maybe you can enlighten us on that. As far as education, what I wanted to know is, again, as a diaspora Armenia, for years during the Soviet era, we were always, you know, so much of how we grow up is trying to build pride as Armenians. And one of the points of pride that we were always told about Armenia, Soviet Armenia, is that we have the best education system of all the Soviet republics. And our scientists were the top scientists in the Soviet Union. That was because of our education system, etc., etc. And then, seemingly quite quickly to us, the narrative changed, and that after the fall of the Soviet Union and the new independence, that now we are told, and I don't know if this is true or not, that there was this precipitous decline in our education system and the outcomes for students, and therefore the outcomes of our science fields and all other fields, and diplomacy and everything like that. So I was hoping you could clarify that for me and hopefully for others.
Well, it's very interesting questions that you have raised. I'll try to answer them to the extent possible. If you are looking at poverty measures, there are several measures. There is extreme poverty and poverty, and last year they come up with a new one. When we say about extreme poverty, it's usually the World Bank calculated $1 or $2 per day subsistence level. And on that level, our poverty levels are 1 to 2%, and they are very low. So it's not kind of a hunger lingering around, and we are going to having problems with that, and there is problem with everyday food supply. But if we are talking about poverty, which is based on consumption basket and how much calories, energy, etc. you are going to, we have 25 to 30%. It depends on the years, particularly very close to 30%. And we have great disparity in rural and non-rural areas. But very interestingly, if you are looking at the poverty patterns, the highest incidence of poverty is not in Yerevan, which is the capital city with the most resources, but and it's not in villages, but in small towns. Because small towns usually were built around or had some type of industrial employment, and now that employment is gone. With the collapse of Soviet Union, there was deindustrialization, and they were part of bigger Soviet networks of supply and demand, as I was telling you. And this network collapsed, and as a result of them, you have higher incidence of poverty in these particular towns. In villages, there is still subsistence farming, there is more income in natural form, etc., etc. As far as polarization is considered, polarization-wise, we are looking at Gini coefficient, which is lower than in the United States. And Gini coefficient is the one that is showing how much the income distribution is skewed. So that's the general thing that we are measuring. It's about 35 or so percent, close to 40. Neighboring Georgia is 40 something. Azerbaijan doesn't publish it at all, so we cannot compare it that way. And it is lower than in the United States. But given the level, there's the not poverty level, but how the difference is between different groups of people owning. For example, 0.1% in the United States owns too much. And it's the lowest quantile, the top quantile, etc., etc. So if you are comparing to that version, there is poverty, as I said, from 25 to 30%, particularly after COVID. We didn't have the lavish support the Western governments gave. And as a result, poverty has increased during the last 2 years. That's the reason I'm giving that range in order to understand. And geographical distribution of it is a different one. To a certain extent, this is also creating and translating into how we are financing our schools. In the United States, schools are financed mostly from property taxes that the local people are paying, and it's self-government organized, and except for that there is a state authority, not the federal government authority. In our case, the system is different because in rural places there is almost no tax base. As a result of it, if we were going to finance the education system as in the United States, it would be crazy disparity, and we would have villages that would have, who could afford only one teacher for all subjects, and much better choice in Yerevan. As a result of it, in order to sustain that, the financing of schools came to be done on per capita basis, saying that the government, central government, is going to give every school the money per student plus some maintenance fee. Because you have school facilities, and these school facilities have to be maintained regardless of how many students you have. And otherwise, within the system, like imagine that within the same school district, you have not one school but 10, and within this one school district you can take your kid to all 10 of them regardless where you live. So Armenia is like that. You can take the kid to any school you want because the money follows based on that. Now the schools have capacity, they cannot take too many students, the government allows them, and based on that they are actually getting first come first served basis. Now they have instituted the system that you are electronically registering for it, etc., etc. So this is how the financing of it works. There was a notion about how much school teachers are paid. It's a very interesting thing. Statistics is correct. They are getting about 50% of the average salary. But statistics is tricky because if you are looking at number of positions or jobs for teachers and people who are working as teachers, we have 40% more people working as teachers than we have jobs. As a result, pay is being diluted. Second, if we are talking about average salary is not very good indicator. We have to talk about median salary. If we are talking about median salary in the country, a school teacher who is employed full-time can get a median salary, which is, again, given Armenian standards of living, is not very high. It's not that you can make a splash on it. We are going to have a living which is very modest. And it's not like you are going to do lots of things, but again, there are differences, but we have a problem with governance of the system. Because of the governance, the school boards are decentralized, the money is coming from center. The school boards are interested in having as many teachers on board to appease the local social situation. As a result, we have more teachers on payroll than we should have, and as a result, the salaries are being diluted. As far as the Soviet education goes, Soviet education and how we are proud of it, etc. Within the Soviet context, our education was good. It was not the wonderful. It was not the shining city on the hill type of thing that everybody came to Armenia to study, and this is the place that was much better than any Harvard and Yale together. But within the Soviet system, it was quite good, and we had disproportionately higher share of engineers and scientists than comparing countries. Doesn't mean that outside of that context, when we had to refigure how we are going to finance, how we are going to retool, how we are going to figure out what develop we are going to do. For example, we had 5 physics institutes. We have more physicists than neighboring countries per capita. And they were working on different programs within Soviet space industry, etc., etc. Now all these things are gone. Physicists are there. They have to apply themselves to somewhere else. They have to figure out things, getting into fields that they were not dealing before. And this is a systemic transformation that we are still going through. And we had Physics Institute, renowned, very good people, very good capacity, that were dealing, for example, high energy physics. But that particular field of physics could be viable only within the context of Soviet space industry. If the space industry is gone, and it has gone not only that it is toned down in scope, that it has become mainly Russian, etc., etc., also it has changed. Now we have very good people who are doing things that we cannot pay for. So we have to refigure. And this is something that we are going to in all our fields. We had burgeoning chemical industry. We had a couple of very big chemical factories, one in Yerevan, one in Vanadzor, etc., that required a lot of chemists. Now none of them is working. As a result, our chemistry department at Yerevan State University is having a hard time attracting students because the job prospects are not there. Now IT is stealing students from every other discipline. This is the only time that I remember the bankers are crying because IT is stealing people from bankers. But this also happens. There is comeuppance from time to time, and bankers have to feel it. So, this is the type of thing, and education-wise, Soviet education was very good in terms of giving a lot of information in a systematized way, but very often the critical apparatus of how to deal with it and the impetus of critical thinking and learning was not there, because if it was too much there, it would be against ideology. So we have also to figure out how we are going to instill new type of more inquisitive and critically thinking based education in our educational system. Plus, as Hasnik already mentioned, project-based education, etc., that so the time wasn't all there, but now everybody is talking there, all these new things, and the internet age is coming. I'm telling all teachers are coming here, I'm saying you are dealing with the first generation in human history that doesn't understand the need to memorize knowledge, because there is Google. And whenever you are telling them something that you have to remember and know this stuff, and their question is why? It's out there, I will get it. Why I have to burden my RAM or something that we don't even think about in terms of brain functioning? They are thinking about RAM, HDD, etc. I don't need to keep all that information in me. I know where I can get it. And there are a lot of students who are asking questions and they are saying, okay, I know where to get it. And don't bother me with all the details. When the time to deliver, I'll deliver. And some of them really do. So this is a new modern, new reality that we are dealing with, and we are trying to address them to the extent possible. Of course, there are a lot of problems, but I hope I answered some of your questions.
Yeah, so if I can add to whatever my colleagues said in terms of education. So firstly, let's consider when we say that Soviet era education was good in comparison to what, and also when we say it was good because so the system was closed. Oops, sorry. So the system was closed, and we have learned it is good because of the propaganda that was there. So to be fair, we can say that it was good to some extent because of talent selection across the whole Soviet Union, because there were specialized schools, phys-mat schools, that students were studying physics and mathematics and engineering, and the scientists were kind of selected from those schools, and it kind of was kind of explicit that, though we have such kind of scientists, they are very good, and we have science which is developing, but because they did not show us those students who are very kind of below the baseline that they have put there. So while we don't have much information about various specifics of the education system, there is some data that, for example, the teachers did not have many developed capacities, and for example, especially in primary schools, maths and language teaching was very low. And also, as Mr. Gabriel has said, the thing concerning, I lost the top part. Sorry. So overall it was good because of the kind of engineering and stuff, but as we don't have much information about it, we can't really prove that it was good or bad. And also, yeah, I remember, because it was very centralized and it was very much kind of monitored, there was no such a thing as critical thinking or, I don't know, questioning the teacher, etc., because it was very teacher-centered, which means there really can't be any kind of opportunity for reflectivity or thinking or such kind of stuff. So when we say it was good, it was better than the education system now, it's really kind of uncomparable to what we had then and what we have now. For example, another thing, teachers who got their education during Soviet times and now work with young generation, they said, oh, during Soviet times everything was good, and one thing is true, the teaching profession was respected and trusted, which is not now, unfortunately. But when I ask follow-up questions, okay, what else was different or what else was better, no answer is there. So yes, if I can just sum up the answer to your question is here.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, before giving chance to Amy for her question, I'm not professional in this, but I think that why Armenian Soviet schools in Armenia were so attractive for diaspora, because they provide Armenian identity-based education. Even in Soviet time, of course they were Soviet schools, but even in Soviet times in Armenia, the share of Armenian language, of Armenian history was considerable big, and that's why they gave chance for children coming from diaspora to involve in Armenian identity-based education.
Basically, Armenian language instruction, about 90%. And for example, if you take Belarus, Minsk, it was 10% Belarusian education and 90% Russian education. So to give you just perspective.
Sorry, Amy, please. You can ask your question.
You mentioned this desire to shift to an emphasis on critical thinking, project-based learning within Armenia. The United States is in the middle of doing the same thing. That being said, we're here to increase the instructional resources available to American teachers about Armenian genocide and the instruction regarding genocide in general. But the question that we're wondering is, to what extent is that education being provided here in Armenia? Your description of history textbooks here in Armenia suggests it's not really thorough. And I'm asking that after having spent time with teachers in Germany just earlier this summer, and the extensive systematic approach that they have toward Holocaust education. So if you could describe for us what the goals are for Armenia to improve education regarding the Armenian genocide in general. So that's the first question. Secondly, as a high school educator, I'm one of many here in this room, and I think all of us would welcome an opportunity to partner with either an Armenian high school in which the students can speak English, or American University here in Armenia. If we could in some ways collaborate via Zoom or what have you in a collaborative study of genocide as it relates to the Armenian case, we would welcome that opportunity. That's the second part, if you're open to that. And then the third question I have is more broad regarding international relations. If you could characterize for us, what is the relationship between the United States and Armenia over the last 31 years? How has it evolved, devolved? How would you characterize that relationship? So, good luck, thank you.
I think we can start from the last question and give floor to Baran to remember yourself.
Okay, starting from the last question. Before I touch upon the U.S.-Armenian relations, I have to say that just to give you a glance of where Armenia's current geopolitics stand and where the U.S. fits into that picture. Well, Armenia is one of the rare countries in the world that 80% of its borders are sealed, hermetically sealed. And that changes a lot. And some of the criticism, some of the justified criticism that we hear about Armenia's development path is somehow linked to that question. So Armenia is in a very precarious situation that 80% of its foreign trade goes via Georgia and 20% via Iran. So Armenia's over-dependence on these trade routes also determines Armenia's foreign policy priorities and the foreign policy landscape that Armenia has been dealing with since the early 1990s. Now, as these conversations have resumed again about our Armenian-Turkish border to be opened, once again hopes have emerged that this is going to change the socioeconomic situation in the country. It's going to have impact on the living standards in this country, but all these estimations are premature, to say the least, because we never have had open borders as such, so that notion needs speculations. Well, there are no speculations what will this opening of the border entail. I'm leaving aside all other security-related questions that may arise after the border is open. So that brings the EU and the United States into this region with different priorities, with different set of priorities, with different interests into this region. Of course, this region has been and remains widely Russia-dominated region, but more and more actors are emerging, and among them Turkey is one of these actors that is becoming more and more assertive with its foreign policy, and with this we see that U.S. policy hasn't been quite consistent in this part of the world. In the 1990s, we see with these Democrats in power, Clinton, we see more engagement of nurturing democratization, nascent democratization in this country, but later on with Bush administration we saw more of a withdrawal from that agenda. And again, with Obama, we see more interest in this region, trying to strengthen the democratic institutions in this country, U.S. Embassy and USA has been instrumental in many regards in this country. Their help has been critical. But we see these zigzags in U.S. policy in this region, and therefore, if I would come up with one consistent line of analysis of U.S. policy in this region, it's going to be rather difficult to do. So when it comes to your question about education, I think there are a lot of fundamental questions that are just shelved for the time being, hoping that the right times will come and the time will be right for this kind of reforms in the education sphere. I think that Armenia's genocide education in this country is, for the sake of a better word, is underdeveloped. And if you go and talk to high school teachers, if you go and talk to high school graduates, like I said, because of this critical thinking skills are missing, some of these important fundamentals of how to interpret genocide are not there. Just one fact, right? We all know that it's an established fact that 1.5 million Armenians were killed during the genocide, but almost 99% of the teachers would say it happened only in 1950. But it happened for the duration of several years, not only during that year that this many people were killed. So just one example. If I can go on and on with these examples. And recently, the genocide, the way it was taught and it's presented to high school teachers is very victimhood-driven narrative, whereas there are other stories of genocide that has been silenced for decades. Now a new approach is emerging in the country. Not that many scholars are writing about the resistance during the genocide also. Some areas, and in those parts of Western Armenia where there was resistance, more people survived. So these stories are not really included in the curriculum, and therefore we have this very dichotomic approach towards genocide, that Turks were bad, the Turks were awful, the rest, the West came and helped us, if I try to put it in very, very simplistic way. The role of the Kurds during the genocide is not presented in a way that we as historians know the kind of role Kurds have played during the implementation of the genocide phase. Some cases we see that some scholars, even teachers, start the genocide story the moment that Manasgird battle happened in 1071. So this kind of stretching the imagination sometimes confuses the kids rather than helps them to understand the context of the Armenian genocide. So against this background, yes, anyway, I guess I can speak on behalf of our program. I guess we're more than open. I was going to have some tangible takeaways from this meeting, that we can have meetings and collaboration, can come up with collaborative platforms so that you can also help us how you teach genocide, because it's also comparative genocide. This is something that is also missing in Armenian school curriculum. Even another one point, it's even Armenia's recent national security strategy that was adopted in 2020 states with little sense of explicit uniqueness that the first genocide occurred. The Armenian genocide was the first genocide of the 20th century. But the research shows that it's not the case. In early 1900s, there was genocide in Africa committed by the Germans first, and then the others. So also the mutual learning of genocide, these mass atrocities, where the Ottoman Empire, Ottoman leadership, Ottoman generals learned the mass atrocities. This learning experience is not present in the schools. Therefore, this contextualization is absent So therefore, when I met Roxanne in 2010 and then 2018, she told me about these issues, and I said, Roxanne, I think the methodology of genocide education teaching in the States should be exported to Armenia. Really, I mean, some of the things that she told last time, I was quite impressed.
So partnership is something that would interest you.
Definitely, yes.
Right.
I'd actually like to say it was me. That you and I were talking, it was Sarah, but Roxanne is my sister. So, but I'd also like to add to that, that in a collaboration with Armenia, if we could even look at doing something, a collaborative process with teachers, there's also something that we have a great bit to learn from Armenian scholars and teachers as well. That I've found kind of consistently is that a bit like we were talking about the other day with Orientalism, I'm very much trapped by a Western perspective on problem solving with human rights and genocide, with the way I view problems and solutions with a Western lens, and our colleagues in Armenia have had similar training, but also uniquely different from a different part of the world, and have a lot to share with us that was eclipsed in our education because of Cold War politics that I think we can also learn from and find solutions to, and maybe be a bit more proactive ourselves on. And I certainly would love that. Surin has been extremely instrumental in showing and helping me kind of.
Yes, I'm not presenter today, but I think this question is connected with me very closely. And Armenian genocide, topic of Armenian genocide is part of the Armenian history curriculum. We don't have specific course on the Armenian genocide in schools, but we have some courses here at the American University of Armenia. We have minor for genocide and human rights here at American University. We have courses, we have MA program at Yerevan State University on genocide studies. And here the problem with the teaching methods, teaching techniques in Armenian schools, because to teach genocide you should have some specific skills. But if you are just teacher of the general history in schools, you teach genocide as you teach other topics, and sometimes it is problematic because you can put the burden of being genocide to children, and you should use some specific methods to avoid it. And that's why in Armenian Genocide Museum now we have courses for teachers of Armenian schools, history teachers, when we try to provide them with the skills, with the information, how to teach, how to touch with this issue and that issue, trying not to traumatize students, and because sometimes they start very early in school, sometimes they bring their school their children. They are just 5, they are 10, 9, 10 years children. They come to Armenian Genocide Museum, and their teacher asked our guides, please present in a more torturous way, present in a more awful way to the teachers. And that's why I think the problem is that we should change this methodology of teaching, and some try to avoid some Soviet narratives, because as Baran mentioned, for example, these resistance methods, the methods of self-defense and resistance in the time of Armenian genocide, they're not so well covered in our textbooks because it is Soviet narrative. In Soviet times, they presented Armenians as victims, only as victims, who went like sheep to slaughterhouse, and this is their famous phrase. We can in Holocaust scholarship, because they wanted to show that Armenia without Soviet Union has no chance to survive. And if Armenia out of Soviet Union, the Armenians were killed, they were murdered, genocide was committed. But Armenians in Soviet Union, they are safe and sound and they are secure. And this was Soviet narrative of the topic of Armenian genocide. And unfortunately, because we have some teachers who come from the Soviet times, they continue this narrative through generations. And the first problem, the first goal for us in genocide education, how to teach teachers in Armenia, secondary and high school, how to teach them how to present the topic of Armenian genocide.
Sudan, if I could address Emmy for just a moment and just say, where did you go? You're somewhere there. Thank you. Sarah was here in April, and we had an incredible opportunity to meet with the faculty who teach in some of our courses that are within the Genocide Studies and Human Rights minor. And part of that conversation was about, are there opportunities for us to think together, potentially do what you're asking, which we didn't quite get to, but I think is a great opportunity to perhaps do something collaboratively around a project. So the big picture answer is absolutely, we would love to find ways to collaborate as a whole or individually with those of you who are here that are interested in it. We've gone a little bit over and I'm very sensitive to time. I know that our panelists are willing to stick around for a little bit and answer some questions. I want to thank you, Sudan and Vache, Hasmig, Vahdam, thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. It was a great opportunity for us to be able to think a little bit about how we've developed over the last 31 years. Again, I want to thank the Genocide Education Project for bringing us together to have this opportunity to have this discussion and to learn a little bit. And to all of you who are here today, it really was an incredible opportunity for AUA to be able to host you all here. Good luck on the rest of this workshop. It's such important work, and in any way that we can be a part of it, we want to be. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Thank my students who are here, and thank. I want to stress that the importance of such discussions and the lack, and even not the lack, but even the absence of such discussions in our society, without personal labeling, division to black and white, but objective assessment of, or if you want to diagnose the current reality and the sequence of political decisions, educational policies, economic approaches, and societal perceptions that brought us here when we are now. And I think each of you will bring something with you to think tonight. And thank you again for coming.